Hey, yo, welcome to the Godcast.
I hope y'all are buckled up, because things are about to get weird.
I don't understand why you chose me.
You want to change the world, son. So do I.
Where are we at in terms of history on the timeline? Where are we exactly? I'm just trying to uncover the truth and bring forth what I can see as the truth. The Bible seems to be predicting more things than any other conspiracy theory type information, Look, one thing's for certain, that there is so much power in the name of Jesus Christ. That I know for sure.
Welcome to Godcast.
Welcome to Godcast.
The Goodness Over Darkness.
The Goodness Over Darkness podcast.
Here is your host.
Here's your host, Emmanuel Kingman.
Emmanuel Kingman.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
It's showtime. What is going on, everybody? I am your host, Emmanuel Kingman. Welcome to Godcast, the Goodness Over Darkness podcast. How are you all doing? Unfortunately, Mimi is not here with me again. She is at yet another paint party, working the nights away. And I myself had a very long day. I had to rush to get here on time, and I was still a few minutes late, but my guest was very understanding. So, my special guest today was Old Scary World. He does not want to have his name out there just yet. He doesn't want to have his face out there just yet, but he has an Instagram with a good amount of followers on it. His name is Old Scary World on there, or maybe it's Mudflood Memes on Instagram. But he has a website, oldscaryworld.com. He sells clothing with truth on it. He has one that has the flat earth. He has one with I believe it is Tartaria as a shirt. What you see in the background here, my globe that I was pointing at in the intro. If you guys are watching the video, I was pointing it out. It says Tartaria on it. That is what I believe that is one of the shirts that he has. It's a big globe, just I think colored like this too as well. So maybe it's this one that the shirt is in honor of. I'm not sure, but he has different things like that. A couple different things to say, something about the Antichrist. There's also another one about flat Earth. I forget exactly, but it's pretty cool stuff. I will say that, and I probably will be ordering something here in the near future. But on today's episode, we had planned on and set out to talk about the mud flood and the old world, which we did talk about the old world, the old scary world, as I maybe should be saying. Not that it was necessarily scary or that it's scary to look at or think of, but we were talking about a lot of things centralized around Christ. And we were talking about different things. Towards the end, we were talking about the child sacrifice and the SRA, the satanic ritual abuse. And he was saying that is part of the reason why his name is Old Scary World, because that was kind of the inspiration for those types of things. That when we're studying these conspiracy theories, we find these different things and it can be scary. So that is kind of the beginnings of that. Very interesting guy for sure. We talked about so many different things. I brought up the possibility that 9/11/2001, build this off of the Ryan Alexander interview I had, where we have 1,000 years missing, possibly, right? That maybe 9/11 is considered in a lot of communities Jesus's birthday, September 11th. And It's also the first day of the year in Ethiopia, which is strange. That's where Enoch is from. That's the Ethiopia, the Ark of the Covenant. Ethiopia's Bible is the only one that still has the book of Enoch in it. There's a lot of different things with Enoch and Ethiopia and 9/11, but Jesus is thought to believed or is believed to be born on 9/11. So 9/11/2001, if 1,000 years are missing, and if Satan, like the Bible says, Satan will be bound in the pit for 1,000 years, then 9/11/2001 would be exactly 9/11/1001, which would be exactly 1,000 years from the time he was bound and thrown into the pit. Because to me, keeping track of the years only makes sense if you're keeping track for a reason. And if the people weren't sure that the millennial kingdom was happening at the time, then there would be no reason for them to begin keeping track of time. But if someone threw Satan in the pit for 1,000 years, well, that would be a reason to keep track of time, because you have 1,000 years until he is loosed again. And maybe that mass ritual of 9/11/2001 was maybe some kind of celebration. Maybe that's when, as I said in the Matthew Landman episode, maybe that is when the United States was infiltrated by the enemy. Maybe that is when the takeover occurred. I don't know. It's possible. It's interesting to say the least. And it makes a lot of sense, actually, from what we've been uncovering on this podcast as of late, with the rapture probably having occurred. Well, I will actually go ahead and say definitely has occurred. I can't actually bring you verifiable proof that the rapture itself has occurred. I can just bring you the circumstantial evidence that has led me to believe this, which I have done throughout many different episodes or guest appearances. I think I went most in depth and detail on it between my appearance on Down the Rabbit Hole and on the Tartaria Roundtable that took place on the Josh Monday Christian and Conspiracy podcast with the guys from Rising from the Ashes, as well as Mark and Josh and Jason, Mark Steves, I'm sorry, from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, and Josh and Jason from Josh Monday's Christian and Conspiracy. So between all of those different things, between those two different things is where I got into the most evidence of why I believe the rapture has occurred. But there's even more evidence that I haven't brought up yet, things that maybe I'm not sitting on it for any particular reason, just it hasn't come into my mind when I've been talking about it. So just building off of that, 9/11/2001 mass ritual, we know that the killing of the king 38 years prior, or 37 years and 37 years and 9 months or so, whatever it was. I don't know exactly, but maybe that was the last thing. Maybe I've heard the possibility that Jesus actually was 37 when he was killed and not 33, the killing of the king. Well, maybe, that's the way that it started and that's the way that it ended. It's the same event happening, just in reverse, that it was 37 years from the start, and this was 37 years to the finish of this 1,000 year period, not the start of the world or finish of the world, just of this 1,000 year period. 37 years in, they kill the king. 37 years until Satan is released, they kill the king, which was the president, which was JFK. And then the final takeover was 9/11/2001, when You heard Matthew Landman in that episode talk about how 2 tons, each of those engines are 2 tons, and there's not even holes in the windows of these massive, massive things. So, to me, it was obviously someone shot a missile or a drone, whatever. Something was shot in there, and whatever. I'm not here to get into 9/11, but to me, it was a hostile takeover, and it has been withheld in a very unusual way. And the only way that I can really understand that the hostile takeover has happened is with my theory that these low frequency demons are coming out of our technology, that they are being projected here, and that somehow they have entered host bodies, and that's how they have taken over. Well, we get into that in this episode as well. I got to mention a few different ideas that I've had that are pretty out there, but are still based in logic, and there is evidence to support these claims, much evidence. I don't typically say anything, any kind of theory, unless I have some evidence for it, or if I don't, I'll say, this is just some crazy thought that I had one time, but it's still something that lines up. I really try to have a grasp on the ideas that I'm having, all the things that I'm going to say. I really try to have a grasp on it before I bring it to my audience, but that's not always the case. So this episode was just it was some great fun. I will say that it was very interesting. We kept meaning to get to the mud floods and those things that go with Tartaria, but our conversation was really centered around Christ. Oh, I also give my theory that God's name is AEIOU, not sometimes Y, but AEIOU, which is probably pronounced Yahuwah, and it would be like YAHEIOUWH, and it'd be Yahuwah, the way WH is wah, like whip or white. It's like you kind of like suck in first before you say, or whip. Coo whip. That's that whole Family Guy thing. So AEIOU, because they are vowels, and if you break down the word vowel, means vow, L, vow meaning a solemn promise, L meaning of or from God. So a vowel would be a promise from God. So what else would God's name be than all promises? Makes sense to me. His name was too sacred to write down, so they only use consonants in Hebrew, which is why it was YHWH, because if you're pronouncing it that way, Yahuwah, which the Native Americans and also the Chinese had different quote unquote lords that they called that name. That's just how I arrived to that. It's all circumstantial, of course, but there's a lot of evidence, and it makes sense when I think of it. So while it may be an out there idea that God's name is AEIOU, it's based in logic and reason, and an understanding of God and discernment, and a constant communication with God that allows me to be able to understand it. Now, I know God is Jesus Christ. Maybe this was before Jesus, the AEIOU. I don't know. Honestly, I don't. Maybe it's just AEIOU just represents God the best because it's all vowels of solemn promises of God. It's symbolic, if you want to say. It's interesting. But yeah, I bring up all these different ideas in this episode, and we have a great time talking about things. And I will say that we had one little disagreement. Well, two different things, but the one thing wasn't really anything. But the other thing was the homosexuality in Christianity. I really want to get people away from thinking that is worse than a heterosexual relationship between a man and a woman who are performing oral or anal or vaginal sex with each other. It's the same thing as two men or two women having oral or anal or vaginal sex together. Doesn't matter what your gender is. The act of itself of having sexual relations without reproducing a child is the same sin. And it doesn't matter if you are a priest and you're having sex with your wife, or if you are addicted to meth and poppers and you are in a meth house having sex with an orgy of men and you yourself are a man. None of it matters. It's all the same thing. Are you really going to say that sex in this way is a different degree of sin than sex in this way? It's all sin. They weigh the same. So to me, and I'm not putting down my guest. We did talk it out on the episode. But to me, that is the control arm of Christianity, where I'm not a Christian. I'm not indoctrinated into the Christian line of thinking. And also something I didn't bring it up in this episode, but as Christians would have a hard time accepting what I think the God of the Old Testament is not God. I think it's this lowercase g God, Janus or Janus. So that is something that Christians wouldn't really accept because of the indoctrination. There's a lot of indoctrination that happens, and it's hard for somebody who is awake, who is also has a big relationship with Christ, who recognizes the flaws in Christianity. It's still very difficult to let go of everything. And I also bring up the idea that religion probably didn't exist before the last mud flood, that religion was added in as another control mechanism during the last mud flood, that the Bible was probably more of a historical kept up type of thing that was happening throughout the ages, that it wasn't just one thing at one time the way it's given to us today, that it was probably a string of books, maybe not year after year, but generation after generation was passed on, and that's how it occurred. And it was just the truth of the world that we live in. It had nothing to do with religion. That it was just the truth of the world that we live in. Of these events happened, and this is for this reason, and this is for this reason, and so on and so forth. And so when they're talking about Janus or Janus as the God of the Old Testament, they were just keeping track of what was happening to them at that time, that this being was doing these things, was actually doing these things. So we'll get into that in another episode. I'm sure I will talk to somebody about that. Until then, you can research Janus on your own, which Janus is. January is named after Janus, the first month. He's a Roman god, a two-faced Roman god. He was completely holy and completely evil all at the same time. That's what his two faces. And then we have our archways, these different, they look like magnets that are just archways in the ground. You'll find them all over the old world stuff. that they're in honor of him. That's what those archways are for. That sometimes you'll see them in a four-way, and sometimes you'll see them just in a, you can go through the front and the back, and sometimes you go through the front, the back, and each side, and that's an honor. All of them are in honor of Janus or Janus, the gatekeeper, the first god, as he's known in Roman culture, which would probably be the God of the Old Testament, since it's the Roman Catholic Church are the ones who have put together the Bible that we know today. Makes sense to me. Again, circumstantial, but there's logic and reasoning behind it. So we had a fun time talking, and we explored many different things, several of which I've already spoken about. And you guys are going to find that and much more in this episode. So I want you to wait until the end of the episode before you make any judgments. There no judgment needs to be made. Everyone should just listen to this with an open mind and open ears, and just hear us out as we talk about things in a logical, reasonable way. Then some of the stuff may be very vastly different than what you're used to hearing, or what you're used to accepting into your life. Maybe you want to try to accept Christ into your life more, because there are energies within us that are holding us back when we hear the name of Jesus Christ, and it gives us this feeling of uncomfortability. That's because there is a demonic energy within you, and that is responding to the name of Jesus Christ. It isn't you. It is a parasite that is within you, that only exists inside of you, and it will make you feel like, oh, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that, because it doesn't want to hear that. And that means that it has a big control over you if those types of responses are occurring. So just try to take a deep breath and listen all the way through. It's a really good episode. It's really fun. Make sure you go check it. I'll put all his stuff in the description. Make sure you check out his website, check out his Instagram, and everything else. Stay tuned at the end of the episode for a preview of the next episode. Make sure you go to my website, emmanuelkingman.com, and you can hit me up for some energy work. I can assist you in all of these crazy happenings of quote unquote ascension symptoms and so on and so forth. I can help you, give you an understanding so you can better deal with all this, and you can really clear those energies off of yourself and stop doing the bad habits that are allowing the energies to be there. Also, if you wouldn't mind liking this wherever you're watching it, if you have the ability to like it, share it, comment, tweet it out, send it to somebody in a DM or a text message, whatever, rate and review, anything that can help the show would be greatly, greatly appreciated. And of course, I always appreciate anybody listening to my show. And I love all the feedback that I've been getting lately. It is very humbling to have people tell me these things. Sometimes it seems too good to be true, honestly, that it seems like maybe I'm being, it's some kind of fishing expedition by an intelligence agency. But nonetheless, I am humbled by it, because, and I believe, not that I believe that to be the case ever, but that's always my first line of thinking when I'm having this kind of impact on somebody, because it isn't very believable for me to be able to accept the fact that I'm having an impact on somebody by just trying to find the truth myself and bringing on guests who are doing the same. So it's very humbling, and I'm very honored that you would all take your time to hear me out and listen to my crazy rantings. And it is just a great feeling I get when people contact me. So if anybody wants to contact me just to say hello or whatever, hit me up social media, hit me up on my Gmail, or comment in the YouTube section, whatever. I'm always game to conversate with people. So if you wouldn't mind just doing one of those things, interacting with the show in any way, will greatly help my, I don't know if it'll help the algorithm, but it'll help spread the word, and it'll beat the algorithms that may be holding me down. I don't know that I am being held down, but it would just benefit me. So that would be great. And you could also donate to the show. You could donate directly to my PayPal, or you could donate on my website. I have a donate tab at the bottom. So thank you all for everything that you have done and are continuing to do that help the show grow. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. All right. So without further ado, here is Old Scary World. Hello, everybody. On today's episode, I have on a guest who is a mud flood researcher. He is a knower of Jesus Christ and is trying to bring truth to the world through clothing designs. He is creator of oldscaryworld.com. Everybody welcome Old Scary World to the show. Welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing excellent. Well, I literally just got home from work, and I was a few minutes late here because, I had to use the restroom and try to shove some food down my throat really quick and feed the cats. I had a whole mess of things I had to do. So I wasn't too late, which was a good thing. And I am here. So it is all love.
Sounds good.
So why don't you tell the audience and myself a little bit about yourself and how you have come to be in the position of selling merchandise that has truth on it, that involves mud floods and Jesus Christ and all the different things that your clothing line has with it.
Well, I've always been interested in owning my own business since I was a kid, honestly. And I grew up skateboarding and, riding BMX bikes and stuff like that. So I had an early exposure to brand marketing and seeing how when people have an activity that they're into, they gravitate towards brands that are owned and operated by people within that community, within that industry. So yeah, I started making t-shirts when I was a kid for skateboarding and making skate videos and all that kind of stuff. And then I got into music and made homemade DIY t-shirts and products for that. And I've always just liked building things and making things with my hands. So when I got into the mud flood thing, it was a natural progression to try to get, publicity or to try to get people into it through clothing, because people like to identify with what they believe in. They like to broadcast it, in the Western world. That's a kind of a phenomenon. Is kind of projecting in a positive way what you believe in or what you're into. And also it helps recognize fellow people on the street, like, hey, I'm into that too. I like that band, I like that clothing line, whatever. But how I got into the mud floods and learning about the old world and Tartaria was also a natural progression, because I grew up in the 80s. I was born in the 80s and I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s. So I remember when the X-Files came out, I was really into that when I was a kid. And that was kind of my jumpstart into quote unquote conspiracy theories. And it was really easy to absorb all the easy ones like JFK, the moon landing hoax, little green men, which I don't believe in anymore. It's like dinosaurs, it's like for little kids,
Right.
And then obviously 9/11 happened. And day one, all my friends were like, there's something fishy about this. Like before, it was a big thing.
So you were in your teenage years at that time?
Yeah. I mean, I was 17 years old when 9/11 happened. I wasn't even a legal adult yet.
That's like prime conspiracy theory age.
Right. But I was already kind of like, I already knew about a lot of weird stuff because my dad had a lot of weird books and he was a bit eccentric, and he kind of taught me both sides of things, as far as that he wasn't an atheist, but he wasn't a Bible thumper. but there was Bibles in the house, there was Qurans in the house, there was books by Friedrich Nietzsche, there was just everything. There was books by Mandy P. Hall, the famous Freemason, alchemist, I guess Gnosticism, that kind of stuff was around. So anyways, so yeah, I've always been interested in all that stuff. So when 9/11 happened, that was obviously like a pivotal moment for everybody, but I was already kind of, used to that kind of stuff. And then when 4chan started to get big and they had the paranormal board and all that stuff, I got on that. And then I found flatearth.org back in 2003. And I was showing my friends and they thought I was crazy. I said, no, look, I mean, this is really interesting stuff, guys. Because I never thought about the earth being flat before I was, 18, 19. That wasn't really a thing. Like, because we're programmed to think like, well, it's got to be round.
Right.
We're just kind of told that. So yeah. So anyway, so fast forward to probably a couple of years ago, I found some channels on YouTube where they were talking about this lost kingdom of Tartaria. And so I looked at the maps and I said, yeah, there's something to this.
Yeah, you can see my background. I own this globe that you see. Well, it's just a photo of it. The globe's in the other room, but yeah, it's one of those. Cool. Yeah, it's one of those. I bet it's like a Freemason thing that somebody got at a one of those. I don't know, not yard sale, but one of those lockers that were, someone went and bought it. I can't even think of the words right now, but yeah, they got it from there, and then I got it from them. So it's super interesting.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. And like, I look at the maps and I see these little cities. Like when you look at the old maps of Tartary, you see these little kind of blips and they look like buildings, and you really look at them and they look like little skyscrapers. And they're dotted around what's now, I guess, Mongolia, Siberia, the Balkans, the Eastern Europe.
Yeah,
and so I said, well, there must
stuff on these maps.
Exactly. And then maps are really, I've always liked maps. When I was a kid, I would stare at atlases for hours and hours. So that was pretty easy to get into. But when I started learning about the mud flood, it was actually from watching John Levi, who's on YouTube. He's pretty big on YouTube.
Yeah, I've heard of him. I haven't actually checked him. I haven't gotten a chance to check him out. People have been sending me his stuff, and I was already aware of his stuff. It's just, things kind of, God just kind of guides me in a direction. So when I get to somebody, I get to him. I just have so much on my plate that it's hard to check out everybody. But I heard John Levi is a top guy in the mud floods, and now even Crater Earth as well. So that's
the new thing. And what I was telling the host of the Shadow Band podcast was, this is our generation's research. In other words, the boomer thing's got to go, like JFK, the moon landing hoax, even MK Ultra, which is still active under, different project names. And it's important. Those are like foundations. Those are things that you can absorb and you can show people and they can kind of just go figure it out on their own.
Paperclip.
What's that?
Operation Paperclip.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, World War II stuff, anything to do, basically anything pre 9/11 is like boomer stuff or Gen X stuff. I'm not a Gen Xer either. Technically, I'm a millennial because I was born in 1983/84. So what I'm trying to say is the explosion, and I see all these accounts on Instagram and TikTok and other social media platforms, YouTube, where people are talking about really off the wall stuff. But to me, it's not that off the wall because I grew up knowing about a lot of those fundamental things.
Right. Yeah, you do have to have a base understanding. Like, to me, nothing's off the wall. Everything, I'll make a spot for everything on my wall because everything's just possibility.
Exactly. So it helps to have that springboard. Plus, you don't get that like shock because some people, they like overdose on red pills, and they go into the black pill territory. To me, I try not to ever get black pilled about any of this stuff because it's all God's plan. And I know that none of this stuff can hurt me because I have the armor of God.
Yeah.
I have people send me all this propaganda. I consider propaganda about, can we talk about the cold that's been going around for 2 years or?
Just be careful. Don't use certain keywords. I just got dinged for my first video on YouTube.
All right. Yeah. I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. Okay. So basically like what I'm trying to say is people send me videos about that and, all this stuff. And I tell them, I say, I'm not worried about this. I don't live in that world. I'm not participating in this demonic thing here.
I'm right there with you.
I don't worry about it. I live my life under God's plan. I know that God doesn't want me to worry about it. So why am I going to trip on it? And the same thing with the mud flood. Like if the mud flood happens again, if we have a great cataclysm, if there's a flood, if there's volcanic eruptions, anything, it's like God showed Noah a rainbow sign, to say, I will never flood the world again. But there's a kind of an idiom or an adage or a little rhyme where it says, God showed Noah a rainbow sign, but he said it's the fire next time. And that's
that's already happened.
Exactly. So, but see, that's the thing about natural disasters or pestilence is it doesn't bother me. So I don't get black-pilled. A lot of people get black-pilled. They learn all this stuff. They learn about the federal government. They learn about how everything works, and then they get like depressed.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
went through it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to jump in. That I find that most people that get black-pilled have a very weak connection with God, and I'm not judging strength and weaknesses. Just it is not a very strong connection. But I find everybody who I talk to anymore is someone of Christ. It's not even that I've been, searching that out. It's just what has happened. And everybody is just like super chill. And they're just like, yeah, God has me protected. Whatever happens, it's going to happen. I'm just going to be put in the right position at the right time. And if I worry about it, then that's, there's no reason. Then I'm making up thoughts in my own head and getting lost in my own thoughts. And it's then it becomes an old scary world because you're like, I'm black-pilled.
Exactly. Yeah. And I chose that name not to instill fear or to say like it's spooky or anything, but it's a scary world because we don't talk about it. And I was saying this on the Shadow Band podcast that the old world is scary. It is frightening. It's like the past, the way that we perceive history is kind of like, it's almost like a philosophy. Like we look at the history not as events that occurred in the natural world. I look at the old world as something that occurred in a biblical or a theological sense. Like that because people say, well, if the Bible's real, if God's real, then how come things don't happen? Look around. Things are still happening.
Yeah.
There's still miracles, and there's still destruction.
Yeah. And there's the craziest part is that they've added time to our timeline. I don't know how many years, 700 or 1,000.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure exactly how much, but they added time to our timeline to make it appear as if God just stopped.
I'm hip to that.
Stopped happening. 2,000 years, Jesus came and that was it. Even though there's still several more weeks of the prophecy to go. The world isn't over, obviously. So.
No, I'm hip to that phantom time thing. I know a little bit about that, and I did some research on that too. And that checks out too, especially when you think about when we switched over from the old calendars.
Yeah, well, there's even so there's a lot of the flamenco stuff. I had a guy on talked about that. Super interesting. I don't know if I completely buy the way that flamenco does it. He tries to overlay the same or similar events as if they were only one event and told many times. I believe in the fractal nature of life and that things are repeating themselves on smaller and larger scales. So calling Christopher Columbus and Noah's Ark the same thing to me just has no bearing in it.
Yeah, I don't think I could subscribe to that either.
Yeah, but maybe Christopher Columbus didn't happen. I'll say that. That's a possibility. But definitely Noah's Ark wasn't just a few hundred years ago when maybe the mud floods occurred. I don't believe that. But there's at least 700 years that you can account for in architecture where the Romans, they say they were building certain things up until 230, approximately the year 230, and then they didn't build like any, I forget exactly what it was. It's something very, the easiest thing to realize that, this is not true. It was like they didn't have churches. They stopped building like everything but they built no apartments, they built no churches, and they built nothing of some other important building from the year 230 to about the year 930. So that's 700 years where they were building, quote unquote, building other things, these megalithic structures, if you will, but they weren't building housing units for people. They weren't building religious places of worship. So, you know, that right there in itself, and that's according to mainstream history, that in itself, how is that not questioned? That 700 years they just weren't building, you know, and it started a little bit around the time when this gentleman named Paul, I'm not sure if it was Paul of the Bible, but there was someone named Paul who was going around preaching Christianity, and it's even written on maps in the top right corner, right where Tartaria is and the Cathars, and it says I-290, something about Paul coming here to preach Christianity. And then then the Genghis Khan became a Christian and went around conquering in the name of Christianity. It's super weird. We're not told that in our history, but
no,
I mean, we can find all this information.
And I'm glad that you brought up the conquering under Christianity thing, because that's very relevant. That's very relevant to what's going on right now. When you get in arguments with atheists, is they say, oh, well, the world would be such a better place without religion, without God. And they're not talking about Eastern, you know, gods, because they never want to, you know, talk about Buddhism or Hinduism or Taoism or any of those Eastern religions, because according to them, for some reason, they're completely innocent. But anyways, they're always talking about Christianity. They just, they don't usually say it. It's always Jesus is this, Jesus is that. But what they don't realize, and I want your listeners to think about this if they haven't heard this theory before, is that it's not really a theory, it's actually fact, is that we're living off the fumes of Western civilization. And Western civilization was founded and forged with the understanding of Christianity being the uniting force of the European kingdoms. In other words,
all their flags.
Yeah, exactly. And we were always fighting in Europe, because I mean, obviously I'm of European ancestry. The Europeans were always fighting before they all unified under Christianity. And that was brought here to the Americas. Our founding fathers were more or less Christian, they identified as Christian. These values that we have, they're based off the 10 Commandments. So when atheists try to claim that morality is based in nature, that's a fallacy. That's
a free Masonic type deal.
Yeah, what they're saying is that they could continue to live like that without religion. That may be true, but where did it come from originally? The ideas of don't kill people, don't rape people, don't steal from people, don't lie, don't cheat, all those things, that's all based in Abrahamic religions, whether it's Islam or Christianity or Judaism. That's all. You take that away and we'll go back to being savages. We will go back to being just barbarians within 50 years.
Well, I will say, it's funny you use the word barbarians, because that is a slander term for Tartarians. So it's funny how you use that. But I will say that I think that America was founded in the false belief of Christ's conscience rather than Christ, because they came to this country in order to get away from religious persecution, and our flag doesn't have a cross in it. So I'm not sure exactly what happened in Europe. I've heard many different theories that they're the tribes of Israel, that maybe so many different things, but I am sure about the Christian Crusades happening, and to some sense, you know, they have the Christian Crusades, they have the Catholic, the Catholic Inquisition or the Spanish Inquisition, all in the name of Christ, and also with Genghis Khan, and I think that is all in the name of the false Christ. I don't believe that is what Christ, you know, I know Christ very well myself. I have a personal relationship with him. I didn't grow up Christian. I didn't have any understanding of Jesus or God or anything when I was a child. When I was a teenager, I was kind of atheist. I didn't really have a belief system, but I was definitely rebelling, and I ended up in prison. And I prayed to God. I didn't really know what I was doing, and through a slew of miracles, to say the least, I have come to know Jesus Christ very personal. And Jesus Christ would never, ever want me going to murder anybody. There's not. So when people talk about the Christian Crusades, and this is a big reason why Jesus Christ isn't a real fan of what has been occurring in the world, in that so many people are turned away from Christ because of these things. They point to this as evidence of why Christ isn't good. And there's nothing in Jesus's name that anyone could slander. There's no ever account that Jesus did anything semi bad. Like the worst thing that he's recorded doing is flipping the table when they were selling things in the temple. So there's never a bad account of Jesus. So what happened was people put on the flag of Christianity and went murdering in the name of Christianity. They use people's emotions the way that they still do. They manipulate people emotionally and get them to do things. So they went around murdering and conquering under the guise of Christ and this fake divine right to rule, where the people who actually had the divine right to rule didn't care enough to, they're not the people who are out there now being the politicians and the financial leaders and doing this, because they're just living a Christ-like life. So it was the way that it happened was they just became outnumbered. The way Jesus was just, he was convicted by the Romans, and then the Jews had the opportunity to save him, and they said, no, we'll save the other Jesus.
Barabbas.
Barabbas. So we'll save him instead, because Jesus is making us look at our own issues and saying that we could stop this, but Barabbas is saying, no, let's go attack the enemy. And that's, again, it's what happened with this, I believe. So I do believe what you were saying, to how we got onto this, was that we have some kind of Christian principalities and principles, but I think it's all false in order to lead people astray.
Well, yeah, I can get with that too. I mean, obviously there's nothing's 100%
right
airtight. I'm fallible. I'm a human being. I have, I don't claim to preach any kind of new gospel or anything like that. But what I'm saying is, if we don't like where the world is headed in this very secular theocracy kind of technocratic thing, that's what the elites or the rulers or whatever you want to call them, they know that the last thing that's standing in their way is people's personal relationship with God or Jesus Christ. So they push this narrative that what's getting in the way of pleasure of the flesh? Religion. What's getting in the way of personal wealth, greed, all that kind of stuff, like religion. And another thing is an attack on the family. They're saying don't have children, it's bad for the environment, all this kind of stuff. When I was on the Shadow Band podcast, I went into a little bit about how, they're trying to get us to worship the earth, not God, as in like Mother Earth or Gaia, all this kind of stuff. It sounds really
the Green
cute.
Party.
This green movement. And it's great to think like, oh, these people, and that's how they get you, is with this. In one hand, it's, don't pollute the water, don't do this, don't do that, don't litter. Okay, that's fine. That's easy to do. But when you start worshiping trees instead of God, then we have a problem, because it's harder to see. There's a common misconception with the Native Americans being in tune with nature. Yes, they were in tune with nature, but they use that in the sense that if you weren't a chieftain and you were part of a tribe, you had to go to the chief and say, oh, can I go hunt? And if he didn't like you, and he's human, if he didn't like you and he wanted to be malevolent and he wanted to be selfish, he could say, oh no, it's not right today for you to go hunt. And then you would be denied. If you wanted to drink water, you wanted to collect water from the stream, they could say, no, it's not the right time for you. And they would put these limitations by using the earth. And unfortunately, I see that coming with the lockdown type situation, saying, okay, well, there's too much carbon in the air, and they'll just make it up. And they'll say, you can't open up your business today. Yeah. You can't drive today. It's too smoggy. And that's what happens when you leave God and you go to nature worship, is you put people in charge, like a climate board or an environmental agency protection, APA. And then they start dictating what you can do on God's creation, because they make up these phony baloney laws. And everybody goes with it because it sounds like, hey, this is great. You know, this aligns with my personal belief that the earth should be protected.
Well, I will say that the natives at one time, they were all into Christ. There was one, it wasn't even religion. I think actually religion was probably made up about 300 years ago, before the last mud flood, or, you know, after the last mud flood. But they were all into Christ, and they have these, some Native American tribes have rituals where the people in Jerusalem, the Israelites, or the Hebrews, they would be doing this ritual for God, and they were missing a piece of it. And then it turned out that the Native Americans were doing the full thing with the missing piece included, so that they are now have a claim to be some of the original tribes of Hebrew. And they also had a god, something to the effect of Yahweh, something to that effect. That was their god. So there was a time. Now, I'm not saying this isn't for every tribe either, but this is for some of them. So, but what you're saying with this earth worship, it is a very, very strange thing, because we do have to live in harmony with nature. And I don't think you're suggesting we don't have to do that, but there's something above that if we are living by the thing that's above that we won't have to adhere to these laws, because we automatically will if we're adhering to the higher law. And when we want to live by natural law, what that really means, when people don't understand this concept, is that the bigger, stronger animal is allowed to kill and eat the smaller one. They want those rules to apply to us. This is what they are trying to do. They're trying to live by the animal kingdom. They're trying to make us feel like we're insignificant, and that we should just observe nature, because they came up, they're not the seed of Christ. And they came up at a time where they learned from observing nature. So just observing nature, they think that's the right way because nobody told nature, but they're not understanding that nature's connected to God. So they're watching something lower than themselves and thinking that that's what they should be doing. So they should just be going around having sex with anyone. They should be going around eating children. It's no big deal. It happens in the animal kingdom. They should go around. They can murder anyone they want, and they can let off their friends because they're friends. You know, it's nepotism. It's my rules. Yeah. Yeah. That's what it really comes down to when we talk about nature being what is ruling us. So people who haven't thought of that aspect, you know, you should really, really think what that actually means by these psychopaths who are taking these oaths and doing these awful things to children, men and women all across the globe that have been running our world. Like, why would they want natural law? Because, that sounds, you know, let's just live in nature. That's all that means. But there's so much depth to it, then so much deception in it, that if you're not paying attention, you can easily fall into the trap. But as soon as you pay attention to a little detail like that, you're like, oh, okay, I see it for what it is.
Well, they're trying to create miracles. They're trying to be the miracle makers. They're trying to say, okay, they can tell the general public that we're in peril because of the carbon levels or because of this. They can just pull things out of the air that the layperson doesn't even understand or doesn't have the time to comprehend. And then they can say, oh, we fixed it. And then it looks like they performed a miracle. for the earth, which they've convinced people to worship instead of God, because they can't perform real righteousness. They can't perform real miracles because, like you said, they're not the seed of Christ. They're not prophets. They're not even disciples. But they can be disciples of earth because the earth can't speak for itself. They can say, oh, the hurricanes are going to get bad, and then they don't, and they go, oh, it's a miracle. I wonder why. Oh, because we told you guys to do this and you did it. So then you see results. They're false results. They would have happened anyways. That had no bearing on the environment, on the weather system, on anything. But they can say, oh, we did this and then this didn't happen. Okay, why would political elites and billionaires and industry magnates, why would they be buying properties on shorelines if the sea levels are going to rise like they say that they are? We had multiple people, Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and several others just recently buy very expensive oceanfront property in New England, exactly where they say that the sea levels are going to rise no matter what. Now they're telling people it's going to rise no matter what, that there's nothing that they can do and that everybody should leave because they want the land. They're not worried. They know that it ain't going to happen because they're in on it. Why do people pay so much money for houses in Silicon Valley if it's the earthquake zone? Because they know that in the end, it's not going to be the end, and they have the money to rebuild. But what I'm saying, and get back to the point of the Native American thing, you brought that up, and that ties in to Tartaria in the sense that these people came from there. They came over the Bering Strait. They came over. So it is possible, it's very possible, it's very likely that they did have knowledge of Christ. And they brought that knowledge of Christ to the New World before Columbus, before the Vikings. They find skeletons in Washington, in Oregon, in California, in British Columbia that predate the official story of Native Americans by 10, 20,000 years. And these skeletons are of Caucasian or Indo-European, Northern India, Tibetan, Mongolian descent. They're not native bones. In other words, they're not Mesoamerican. Like the Incas went north. They didn't disappear. People go, oh, what happened to the Inca Empire? What happened to the Mayans? They went north. They migrated and became Mesoamericans. You know what I mean?
Yes. I will say that the way that I've come to realize that the Vikings were also tribes of Israel, that when the 10 tribes of Israel, so when the 12 tribes were freed, 2 of them took Jerusalem, the other 10 spread out, and probably a couple went here, a couple went there, a couple went there, and they all started their own different belief systems and all these different types of things. And they had a lot of truth. Obviously, they were the children of God. So I think that the Vikings were probably tribes of Israel as well, just different tribes, maybe ones that were more warring, because the ones that went to America, it seems that maybe they were the Moors or somehow related to the Moors. And I know that we're told the Moors were Islamic, but maybe, like I said, I don't think religion started until that was something that was part of this last reset. I don't think that Islam, Christianity, or Judaism ever existed before that. I think it's all fake. I think that all of the buildings were energetic type of buildings that were used. So anyway, I think that the Moors just they were a part of the tribe of Israel that had a certain understanding. You know, everybody has their own kind of interpretation of things, and they were living in one way compared to, and maybe they were darker skinned a little bit, but still Indo-European, but that compared to the Vikings, who ended up becoming, for whatever reason, very white. Maybe they got stuck in an ice dome, and there was radiation in there that turned them way more white than the rest, and that they were very angry that no one came and freed them or something, and that's when they went around conquering more. I know it's a lot of different things that I just threw in there, but but it seems to me that that's what I've encountered on my research, is that that everybody that went traveling around they were all the tribes of Israel, and that they were each race already, something to that effect anyway.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, everything has to be considered as long as it's not just regurgitating. See, that's the problem with mainstream history and mainstream religion, is they tell us not to look into how we got to this point and not to question it, that it's settled science, it's settled history, it's settled this, settled that. But whenever they want to change the narrative, then it's okay for them to change it. And we've seen that countless times throughout, even just someone who's been to public schools or public universities, and then looking back at what they're teaching now, it's contrary to what they learned. And they go, oh, well, scientists or experts believe that new data suggests blah, 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 and they can just change it. But then when somebody who's independent or somebody who has a different political alignment or different religious background comes and says, I have done some research and I think that this is the reality, then they go, oh, no, and they suppress that, and they call that disinformation, or sometimes even extreme. What's the one that they like to use all the time now? Right-wing extremists. And, they have these like buzzwords to try to put people into a box and say, don't listen to that person, he's crazy. Right. We know what's going on. We know the truth, and that's so hypocritical. I mean, it's a lot of things. It's a lot of bad adjectives, and it's like, here we are, we're just two regular guys who have a completely separate life. Like, you work, you have to do what you need to do to put food on your table. I have a family, I have a wife and a daughter, I have to do. But when I'm in my own home, I should be allowed, if not encouraged, to think, say, and research whatever I want. And we're maybe an extreme, and they don't even want people to be friends with people who have a different opinion. I remember when it was perfectly fine to have, I could talk about reptiles, reptilian, like David Icke, kind of stuff. And you might be familiar with the reptilian theory, that there's an interdimensional race of beings from planet Drake. I think they're demons. If I give it any credit, I say that they're just demons. I don't believe in aliens and spaceships and stuff like that. But anyways, in the early 2000s, I could talk about that kind of stuff with quote unquote liberal people who voted Democrat, and they wanted to hear more. They're very interested in it. And what we see with that was because Bush was president and a Republican in office. And so all the liberals wanted to be against the straight-laced Johnny Lunch Bucket, purple sunglass wearing, wave to the flag kind of thing that was going on. And then towards the end of Barack Obama's presidency, we saw the emergence based, and they were like anti-degenerate, they were pro-Christian. And then all of a sudden the left wanted to attack anything that wasn't completely homogenized and secularized and wishy-washy. And then it was just anybody who had an ounce of faith was the enemy to them. And that ties back to, once again, Christ, any real religion being in the way of their plans of not communism, of not socialism. That's not the goal. The goal is complete totalitarianism, bleak, automated world. Communism, like Stalin, like Soviet, would be like, that would be an improvement compared to what they want. What they want is just complete enslavement.
Yeah, Satan definitely wants full control of everything. He wants to be able to account for everything and make sure everything is exactly as he wants. So I had this idea. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this. I heard this last week, and it just really blew my mind, and it resonated. But I was like, I gotta, before I say anything, I gotta think about this. I gotta, work this out in my head. So I had come across this 1,000 years missing, possibly, right? And to me, it's like, well, why would 1,000 years be missing? It's like, okay, the millennial kingdom I believe fully that the millennial kingdom has happened, and that the rapture has happened, and that the mud flood was the second destroying of the world, as said in the Bible. So to me, I was already to the thinking that, all right, there's some kind of manipulation with the time. Then I found out that maybe 1,000 years is missing. So I was like, okay, well, that just really solidifies it for me that the millennial kingdom definitely happened and they're covering that up. But I also got to thinking, why would they start keeping time? Because to me, it never made sense that they would start keeping it because they had assumed that this child was Christ. Even if that were true, it doesn't make sense to me that they would just start keeping time all of a sudden for no reason at all. And so then I'm realizing, like, okay, well, then they would have to backtrack. And how far advanced did we actually get? I mean, how many years could you go by without knowing you went by a few years? You know, if you went 5 years down the road and you weren't keeping time, how would you know the difference if it was 4, 5, 3, 7? You know, so if you're not keeping track of it, it seems very odd that you would somehow backtrack hundreds of years later, that you would be like, oh yeah, that was God and we are making that time our beginning. It never made sense to me. But then I heard something that I didn't know would happen during the millennial kingdom, is that Satan, at the same time the millennial kingdom happened, Satan would be bound for 1,000 years. So if there are beings, or God himself, somehow someone somewhere bound Satan and threw him in the pit, and they started keeping track of time based on when he went in the pit, then that starts making sense to me. Like, okay, they started keeping track of time because they were trying to count down time until he was loose again. So we have 1,000 years missing, possibly. Jesus's birthday is most likely on 9/11, right? 9/11 is most likely Jesus's birthday, September 11th. So 9/11, 2001, with 1,000 missing years, that would actually be the first day that Satan is getting loosed from the pit. That would be 1,000 years to the day later from when he was actually bound in the pit. So maybe 9/11, 2001 was a celebration of Satan being loosed from the pit. What are your thoughts on that?
Now, see, I like that. I haven't actually heard that one before.
Yeah, it blew my mind when I heard it.
I see the difference between myself and some of your viewers and some of the people that may stumble across this is that gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling. That doesn't strike any fear into my heart. That actually, I would prefer that. See, a lot of people, a lot of Christians even would get scared. See, I have this belief that those who fear God's wrath are the ones who deserve it. Now, I know that that's kind of contrary to the God-fearing, like the belief that you should fear God and that your fear of God is a fear of love. And that's separate.
I don't fear God. I know what people are talking about when they say that, but I don't have any fear of God at all.
Yeah, I think it's all about context. Now, as far as the timeline goes, to me, that checks out because a lot of people, there's this guy, you probably heard of him. His name's Nostradamus. Yeah. And he was like a French guy or something. And he said that the world, according to his timeline, the world was supposed to start ending in 1999.
Oh, really?
There was going to be some comets, and it wasn't going to be like the end, but it was going to be like the beginning of the end. There was going to be a great, like a tribulation. Now, to me, if we're off by 1,000 years, why that gives me a warm feeling is it's saying I didn't miss what is actually going to come, and I'm not probably going to be around to see it. But if we live past the tribulation, if we were born after the true rapture, and we're living in this on this realm under God, then people will say, well, that doesn't add up because things are supposed to get better. But they don't realize what you're saying is that if 9/11, 2001 was the beginning of the quote unquote bad times, well, then that would actually kind of tie in with other religions' beliefs of cycles, like the Kali Yuga with the Hindus. Now, if you go with that, now we're in the age of Kali, and that's going to end, according to their calendar, that should start ending in 2025, 2028, I believe.
Right.
And then we'll go back into another golden age or golden yuga. See, so like the reason it's called Kali Yuga is because now Kali is an interesting deity in the Hindu, because I study all religions. I mean, I identify as a Christian, but I also have to study other religions. That way, if you get into a discussion or even an argument,
Right.
you have to know, you can't seem like you're some closed-minded, backwoods, Bible thumper. You gotta know your enemy. And I'm not saying that all the religions are my enemy, but certain individuals are definitely my enemy, and they'll try to use their religion against mine. So anyways, the point is that looking at their canon, they say Kali is this certain god who appears as other people. Adolf Hitler came as Kalki because Kalki rides on a white horse. Sometimes it's Kali, sometimes it's Kalki. So there's a painting of Adolf Hitler on a white horse, and then World War II started, and I am Kalki, the bringer of death and destruction, like what Robert Oppenheimer said after they set off the first atomic bomb. They saw the mushroom cloud out there in the desert in New Mexico, and they looked at each other and they said, well, what do you think now? And he says, I think we are Kali, the bringer of death. Because they were so like impressed with their creation of the atomic bomb, if you believe in that, because that's a whole other thing, that the atomic bomb is
They
false.
said he started crying, actually, Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I think he cried, and then he made that remark about Kali.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that a lot of people would disagree with your timeline, and they would say, no, Christ. They have this kind of, I call them Care Bear Christians, and they're taking over the church, and they're saying, oh, we can allow homosexuals, and we can allow this, and we can allow that, and it's going against that scripture. And then it's like they infiltrate, and then they start changing, and then they say, well, you can't say this verse, and you can't say that verse, and that verse is hate speech. I mean, that's another thing that I fear is coming, is they'll break down the relationship with God because people have a belief that morality is important, and then that amount of morality will go against their narrative, and they'll try to make Christians into something that they're really not, that they don't even want to be, but they want to be a part of that community. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. See, to me, the homosexuality thing, and I know this is a point of contention for a lot of people. For me, it's no different from a heterosexual man and woman having sex. Sex isn't supposed to be had by anybody unless we're reproducing. Oral sex, anal sex, vaginal sex, none of it should be occurring unless we are reproducing. So to me, homosexuality is the same exact sin as being heterosexual and having sex. And it's, to me, any sin is of equal, maybe there's some that aren't, but they are of equal. So, so I don't agree with the homosexuality part, because it's the same as everybody else that has sex. I mean, unless people aren't having sex at all, then they would be the ones that are sinless. So.
No, I can get with that, but what I'm saying is that when we look at, say, the LGBT community in general, they are opposed to Christianity, but they'll infiltrate to try to weed out people and exclude people from it and turn it into something that it isn't. In other words, they'll take up the banner to use it as to
spread a false message.
Exactly. And we see that with the Catholic Church. We see that with the current Pope being very progressive, let's say. Whereas
I don't think the Catholic Church has anything to do with Christianity or Christ anymore. Not
exactly. But we have people who bless their hearts, but they just don't know any better. Right. And they're being led astray.
It's like it might be the largest denomination that there is.
Roman Catholicism, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a shame because none of it has anything to do with Christ any longer. I mean, it's just all Satan. It's literally the entire thing.
Well, you see that with the way that the Pope and the Vatican is supporting this new narrative with the earth.
You can't, and you can't come in if you don't get, the thing put in you. And
No.
and
No, we can't. No,
couple,
I mean,
couple weeks ago they had that, what you were just saying, the Earth, the Green Party type of
the World Economic Forum kind of what is
yeah.
it? The climate
Right,
council. Yeah. No,
with all
that's
the
all.
different religions. That's nuts.
Oh, that thing too. Yeah, where they put the mosque with the interfaith worship center or whatever it is.
Oh, I didn't even see that. I just meant where all the what you were just saying, the climate council. I mean, it's every religion.
No, for a
Essentially,
second
every
there,
religion was there.
No, for a second there, I thought you were talking about the temple that they want to build, where it's all faith kind of temple.
Oh, right, yeah, the third temple. See, this is part of the reason why I think that we're in some kind of fake tribulation right now, which just leads me further and further to believe that Satan is loosed upon the earth, because the deception, we're in the information age right now, the disinformation age. There's so much information that you can prove any theory you would like to. You can have the cognitive dissonance, and you can have mountains of evidence to prove yourself right, and other people will have mountains of evidence to prove you wrong. And it doesn't matter what the actual topic is, which just leads to me further into my belief, which maybe it's cognitive dissonance, but it just leads me further to believe that Satan is loosed upon the earth, because everyone, all nations will be deceived, which is happening at this moment.
No, absolutely. And the other thing you touched upon with the theory, with your what you postulated about the timeline being like that, is that we have to think about, what does that mean for the rest of our lives? Like, are we to believe that see, the way that people will try to spin it is try to say that, well, then what's the point? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And then we kind of get into like a Calvin, what's the predeterminism, and that nothing matters, and there's no point in praying, and there's no point in salvation, because we already believe in Christ, and belief in Christ is enough, and that our actions and our deeds aren't actually what get us to heaven. I'm sure you're familiar with that concept, that like good deeds don't really change anything, that all we need to do is just believe in Christ.
Yeah.
And they try to use that, and they say, well, I'm this and I'm that, and I don't have to it's a very, like, it's just that they won't, they're like fence walkers. Like, they won't commit. They'll say, like, I'm a Christian, but I'm not going to spread it. I'm not going to tell people the good news. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. And it's like, that's what got us into this problem, where we as Christians who are studying alternative history, alternative timelines, we got into this position because of that coward, of being afraid to shout it and be proud of who we are and what we believe. And then it starts getting, oh, you're stirring people up. You're going to, incite. It's like, that's what Christ did when he gave sermons on the mount.
That I was
he
just
had to
about
rile people up, because they were placid. They were docile.
Right. I was just about to say that myself, is that what that actually means is, if we just our faith alone, what the true message to me behind that means, that with my faith in Jesus Christ, I know he's going to lead me to do things that are quote unquote works, that if I don't have the faith in Christ, then those works are coming to me. But having the faith in Christ, I'm doing those things because of my faith in Christ. So
exactly.
So when we say, oh, we have faith alone, and then you watch like I'll just use an out there example, but say a child is being assaulted by an adult, and you're walking by and you just witness it and don't do anything. You're like, oh, well, my faith alone is enough. But you have the opportunity right then and there to stop it. And Christ, if you have belief in Christ, that Christ would want you to stop that. That's
and I'll give you another example.
What would Jesus do? I always wear this bracelet.
Exactly. And I'll give you another example, is if you have a friend or a family member and they're suffering from depression or some type of mental anguish, some type of strife in their head, and you don't tell them the good news, you don't tell them about Jesus Christ, and you don't give them a Bible, if you don't sit down with them and give them some positive, inspirational some scripture, some type of, then you've kind of failed. And I just got goosebumps saying that because I know it's true. And another thing that I want to point out to your listeners, if they haven't heard of this, is the concept that when you think about God, do you cry sometimes?
Yeah, I do often.
That means that you have a connection. There's people who they think about God and it bothers them. You know, there was a case where there was a person who was undergoing psychiatric evaluation and they thought they were crazy because they started believing in Christ and they wanted it to stop. In other words, they were becoming,
you were convicted by the Holy Spirit.
Exactly. And they thought that they were going crazy and they weren't saying anything. They weren't speaking in tongues. They weren't holding rattlesnakes up in their hands or anything like that. They were just hearing God's voice for the first time, which is your own conscious. You know, it's your own consciousness. That's the voice of God. And they heard it and they wanted it to stop. And then they found that that those invasive thoughts were coming in. And then they were kind of at a war in this person's mind. And they said, what's happening to me? When I think of God, I start to feel better. And then it's like, okay, well, there's your eureka moment. And you say, well, let him in and the pain will stop. Reject Satan and your life will get better. So I see all these people. Yeah, exactly. I see people that I grew up with, people that I was friends with when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, and they're still living that life and they're on psychotropic drugs. They're very miserable people. They've attempted suicide. They're just completely directionless. And it's like, don't you think maybe for a second, just let God into your life? And they go, oh, that's silly. Don't tell me that. And they've been programmed. Well, it's the same thing, just to tie it back to the tonight's subject. It's the same thing. If you get people to not believe in God, how the hell are you going to get them to believe in a mud flood?
Yeah.
Because it's tied to God.
Yeah. And what you were just saying there, I had somebody on my Facebook that I was in prison with 5 years ago. I was in prison with this gentleman and I went on Facebook. I had the Holy Spirit was telling me, to post this. Somebody that was on there needed to see it. I don't know who or anything, but I was just compelled to do it on my Facebook only. And I did it. And he laughed at me. And when I said Jesus is the answer, no matter what you're going through, if you call out to Jesus, he'll be there to help you. And he laughed. He did the laughing response to me. And he is still a drug addict for the last decade plus. And I have been completely freed from that lifestyle. And it's, very apparent if anybody looks at me from then versus now, which he was in prison with me. So he knew somewhat of me, at least the prison version of me back then. And to see me now and to laugh at me when I'm saying that, look at what happened for me when I did this. And you're going to laugh at me as if this is some kind of joke or this isn't real when you're still struggling using drugs in order to make yourself feel good. When I just use the name Jesus Christ, then I feel good. Like how much further into a deception could you be than to stand witness to that and not realize that that person has a demon in them and they're laughing because that is the demon in them that is known as addiction has fully taken over that person. Compared to me with the Holy Spirit in me. And it's not some egotistical thing, I'm better than you. It's none of that. It's just black and white facts that this is how this spiritual warfare operates.
Oh, it's definitely spiritual warfare. Yes, exactly.
Right. And the bystanders, they have to start to notice these types of behaviors and these types of things and start to question, why does Jesus Christ, why does that name give me the willies? Why do I not like that name? Why does it make me feel something? It's like, well, there is demonic forces inside of your body. You are a host and you have all these metals that we know about in our foods, in our water supply, in our oxygen, or in our air supply. I'm sorry. And we have all these metals. We have all these frequencies in our universe that we never had before. And it's getting worse and worse. And you have to understand that your body is hosting demons. It is that simple. You also have chakras where demons can literally in their spirit form be inside of you, energy centers that are in our body. But on top of that, now they can project things from our screens that we're always in front of: computer, TV, cell phone, tablet, laptop, your car, big old car display. All of those things are giving off frequencies. Even if you just have a radio or a microwave, anything is giving off frequencies, and they're coming into your body that way.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up the telecommunications and the data transference aspect to this. Is people used to say, well, when the final judgment happens, when the rapture, or even, the seals are open, anything that's like in Revelations, they say, how will we know? Well, we would be programmed to think now that because of live streaming, because of these mobile devices, that it would be impossible unless you were, you would see it in the skies anyways. The whole earth will tremble.
Yeah, everyone will know.
But the thing is let me lay down something for you and the listeners here. Do you know about Project Bluebeam?
Yes.
Now, do you think that in their infinite evil, maniacal minds, that they would use Project Bluebeam to fake the Messiah?
I think that they might. I don't think Project Bluebeam is for that. I've heard that theory, and the reason why I don't like that theory is because the Project Bluebeam has been around the conspiracy theory community for 50 years already. So I didn't actually believe that it was. I thought it was just more of a psyop until I put 2 and 2 together with that, plus 5G, the exactness of 5G, plus the revelation that the demons are actually coming out of our hardware and our frequencies, that they're being projected out, so that the 5G, in conjunction with them coming from an electromagnetic world into our world, is Project Bluebeam. So while I think that they could do that, I don't think that is what it would happen for. I don't believe that.
Yeah. So you think that it would be for a more secular purpose?
Yeah, I think it would be the quote unquote alien invasion, so to speak, that they would be scaring us that into basically allowing them into our bodies, and we go further into the digital world ourselves by doing VR, psychedelics, and so on and so forth.
So you see possibly the people who are like, we'll just use Christ as an example, say the true followers of Christ rejecting that and going into a pre-industrial revolution society.
Yeah, what do you mean, like farming and agriculture? Yeah, probably. Yeah.
If we're allowed to, of course.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's see, that there's the rub, as Shakespeare would say, because we have the Amish, in states like Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio, even parts of Florida. They're kind of spread out, but the concentration of the Amish and the Mennonite and the Quakers is in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Now, where do you see them in this technocratic, kind of future that we're in? Like, how will they be dealt with? Because they've been the holdouts, they've been the quote unquote Luddites.
Yeah, they're allowed to do whatever they want.
Right, for now.
Yeah.
As we've seen, with the the thing we can't talk about, they resisted that. They didn't really change their lives too much, because they, like you and I, felt like they had the protection of God, and that they weren't going to believe in pharmakeia, which I guess from some sources say translates to sorcery. Yeah, and there's some scripture to back that up. And that those are the kinds of things that I say, we see by the news, as people used to have columns in various, there used to be a magazine, and I encourage people to research this magazine, because there's a lot of interesting information. But there used to be a magazine called Fate Magazine, and it was kind of a paranormal publication that started in the 50s. And it was put out, and they have ghost stories, and they have miracles, and just all this kind of stuff. That was it was basically like the equivalent to the export on 4chan, and it was put out, I think, at least once a month or so. And there was an article that was in every issue, and it was called "I See by the Papers." And this guy would go through all the local news from across the world, and he'd try to find examples of not only scripture, not only of biblical type occurrences or signs of the end times, but also just any kind of freaky, any kind of like what we call supernatural, paranormal things in the news. So I see, when we watch the news nowadays, I see signs. I see things like saying, okay, that correlates with that, and that's a sign. That's an omen. That's a prophecy being fulfilled, you know. And I think where you lose a lot of people is you have this idea that spirituality is this thing that absolves you from any judgment, any responsibility. As long as I'm a good person, as long as I'm a good person. But when you have that kind of mentality and you let evil, like they say, evil only exists when good men choose to do nothing.
Correct.
So I don't like to go, I don't go on street corners and preach and do all that stuff. But I'm beyond the point. Like I've cut out a lot of people from my life because I cannot be around their negative demonic energy. Because that's how they win. They try to say that I'm the oppressor and they're the victim. And the victim is a strong stance to be in, because it always gives you sympathy from people. And I know that, you know, perhaps we didn't talk about the mud flood as much, but people they can use that as a jump off point. I don't have the answers for that. All I know is that when we look at the buildings and we see the sunken windows, what they call, what is it? There's a term in the community that they always use, where the windows are like at sidewalk level and you only see like half the window.
Yeah, I never heard a term to describe that.
Well, it's like when you look at the old buildings.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I just don't know the name for it.
Exactly, right. And you see that kind of stuff. Well, that's the evidence right there in front of you, and then you just kind of like, people just dismiss it and they say, well, I didn't know. Then it's like, well, what do you believe in? And then you have to really sit people down and ask them, and they say, well, what do you believe in? And what do you do with your free time? Because I get that. They go, well, if you don't watch porno and you don't smoke, you know, marijuana, and you don't drink alcohol, and you don't go to concerts, and you don't watch the Marvel movies, and you don't watch the funny movies, what do you do with your free time? And it's like, are you joking?
Research.
Yeah, I research.
Trying to find out the truth of where I live.
You know, I spend time with my wife and my daughter. I experience nature. You know, it's like they make it like, if you're not living their life and believing their lives, then you're not like, and it's really sick how we become so divided, you know. And there's people that are they're really trying to help. And I think that as far as as far as the mud flood thing goes, that's another thing that they're saying, like, well, wake up, because this could happen. You know, one day everything you know could change in an instant, because and
before I woke up, well, I mean, maybe right at the beginning when I woke up, I had the thought, like, I wonder what's under New York City. You know, as I'm studying ancient civilizations and they're finding all these different things, you know, all these different things, North America, Egypt, whatever, just little trinkets, whatever they find, you know, that goes into the museums, or even the stuff that doesn't. They find stuff digging, and I'm like, what is under New York City that they'll never uncover? And then, you know, not too long ago, I find out about the mud floods, and I'm like, huh, well, that's weird, because one of the first things I saw was New York City, and how many different buildings, like you were just saying, have doors that are underneath the ground, let alone windows that are at sidewalk height, but there's actually doors and a whole level of a building that are underground. And why would they build it with doors going into the mud that you could never use? Why would they build it with the windows that are underground that you could never use? Then, you know, the Easter Island heads, they were always like these just big old heads. And then a couple years ago, they decided to, well, let's see how deep they are. And it's, 40 feet underground, huh?
And there's whole bodies.
Yeah, there's whole bodies 40 feet underground. That's very strange. How did that happen? Did someone bury that? Then go back Tepe, and it's like, oh, people purposely buried this 13,000 years ago.
No.
And probably not. It was probably from a mud flood, filled it in. I don't know if it's still being used or not, whatever. I don't trust any carbon dating, as well as anybody who's associated with Freemasons, as Graham Hancock is associated with Randall Carlson. But there are so many different questions. So before we wrap up here, I know we meant to touch on the mud floods, but this was an amazing conversation about Christ, and we kind of jumped all over, but we hit a lot of religious stuff that was going, maybe not religious, but stuff about Christ and different things that are happening in our current world and how they possibly got there. But I do want to ask you about this, because I know you're a great researcher into all this. Have you come across the AEIOU on the buildings?
AEIOU.
Yeah. Have you come across this phenomena that some of the buildings have AEIOU on them?
I'm trying to think. I mean, there might be some vague, well,
well,
no,
you
I
would
mean,
know
well,
it.
No, I think you need to tell me, and then we can go from there. Yeah.
So AEIOU is the name of God. So the reason why I say that is because when we look in history, and we have Hebrew is the oldest language, and we only use consonants because the vowels were sacred. And if you break the word vowel down, it's a vowel. Vow means a solemn promise. L means of God or from God. So what else is God's name other than full of promises? God's name is the promise, AEIOU. And if you were to maybe spell it YAHEIOUWH, it would be something like Yahuwah, and it would be pronounced the way that the Native Americans and also the Chinese used to pronounce their Lord's name as Yahuwah. So the AEIOU buildings, to me, and I've had a guest on, her name's Whitney. She and I, we talk often and off air, and she brought this to my attention, and it just really floored me, because I got this quote unquote download, spiritual type of download into a whole big thing of how that is even possible. And maybe part of Tartaria is Tartarus in the Bible, in the book of Enoch, which is hell. So maybe Tartaria isn't the wonderful spot that we think it is, but actually there were the AEIOU buildings were the ones that were the millennial kingdom, or maybe some of the Christ-like beings or whatever Christ-like people were living in these buildings.
No, that's that's something that's interesting, and that is kind of like a crescendo to this conversation, which I'll be quite honest, I'm not quite ready to end yet, because there's a few other things I wanted to bring up. And it's interesting that you mentioned the book of Enoch, because I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were on a specific verse from that, where he talks about how he saw the rivers flow, and he saw the place where no flesh walks, and where the mountains of the winter, I think it's chapter 17 of the book of Enoch. I don't have it up right now.
I'll pull it up.
Yeah, there's basically, I think 16 through 18 is of interest to the hollow earth, flat earth community.
Yeah, the Middle Earth.
Because it talks about the place, and it's like he's describing the North Pole, if you're into the pole thing. And then if you're not into the pole thing, then it would be the top of the earth.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I have a Book of Enoch series, in which, when he's describing it, I actually say in my series that he's describing the all-seeing eye that's on our dollar bill. He's describing the firmament. He says the four corners of the earth, which is the flat surface. Then there's a firmament going up, and then there's the abyss, and then there's God above that, which to me is the all-seeing eye above the pyramid.
Okay. Now, why do you think that they removed the book of Enoch from the King James Version?
So they removed it because it was, it explains basically everything.
And then we see scripture, we see verses from the book of Enoch and other books, but they're different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's strange because I think I forget what book it pops up in, because it pops up in
It's 5 different books. It's Jude, Patrick, is it Patrick?
Matthew.
Yeah, Matthew, John, Mark. Or no, not Mark, it's Luke. Yeah, there's 5 different. Yeah, my Book of Enoch series, and I actually have my episode on expanding reality today that dropped, and that's what that episode was. My interview on there was about.
Now, in that we see what, like I said, he says, "I see the place where no flesh walks." But then I think in Matthew.
Oh, you there? I'll cut out. Uh-oh. All right, sorry about that, folks. We had a little technical issue. So go ahead. You were talking about Enoch and Matthew?
Yeah, I was saying that in the book of Enoch, he says, "I went to the place where no flesh walks." But in the book of Matthew, he says, "I saw the place where all flesh walks." And I was just wondering if you knew about that translation differential.
Well, so the one that I'm looking at now, 17:2, it says, "And they brought me to the place of darkness, and to a mountain, the point of whose summit reached to heaven." Let's see. "And they took me to the living waters and to the fire of the west." I'm not seeing. Okay, here it is. "And came to the great river and to the great darkness, and went to the place where no flesh walks. I saw the mountains of the darkness of winter, and place whence all the waters of the deep flow." So yeah, no flesh walks. So, and what do you say in Matthew? All what?
It's an inversion. I believe in Matthew, he says, "I saw the place where all flesh walks." Okay. So it's interesting that they completely changed the message there.
Do you know what book of Matthew that is? Or what?
No, I'm not off the top of my head. I guess I would search flesh in the book if your app or your program can do like keyword searches.
Okay, let me try to pull it up, but you can keep talking while I'm doing that.
And I can look too at the same time. But basically what I'm trying to say is that we see that in the flat earth community, and even in the hollow earth community. And obviously, with the, I don't know if you know, there's a guy who's on YouTube called Vibe of the Cosmos.
No, I'm not familiar.
He's been doing a lot of trying to figure out if we have other continents that might be frozen in Antarctica and the North Pole.
Okay.
And his theory, another one of his theories is that the way that the constellations work, the precession of the equinoxes, is that the reason that they're trying to stop global warming is because they don't want Antarctica to thaw, because then we'll see the lost continents. So they're trying to keep the Earth cool, because the sun, its direction, its relation to the heavens isn't what we're told, by mainstream science.
Right.
And that eventually the sun is going to start heating up other parts of this Earth, because we're not in the Tropic of Cancer or Capricorn anymore. And that's the other interesting thing that he brings up, is that why are we still in those tropics? It's like, why do the other ones exist if we're never going to go into them? And then how that relates to Jesus is he tells his followers, he says, "I will be with you till the end of this age." Now it gets mistranslated to "I will be with you till the end of time," but the real translation is "I will be with you till the end of this age."
Right.
And then he's Pisces, and he says, "Go forth into the house of the water bearer," which is Aquarius.
Right.
And then we see when I believe it was Moses. Was it Moses who went and told people to stop worshiping the cow, the sacred cow, golden idol?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that was the age of Taurus. And he was saying we need to start worshiping Aries, which is the ram. And then Jews to this day still blow on the ram's horn during like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, all their high holidays. So Jesus was saying, like, the end of the age is the end of Aries, which it ties into about 3,200 years. And then we have Jesus being Pisces. He's the fish. He's like represented as a fish sometimes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Aquarius. And in the Bible, and unfortunately, I don't know the exact passage, he says, "Go forth into the house of the water bearer."
Wow, I
So,
did not know that.
yeah, I mean, you can look into that a little bit. I apologize for not having more information
worries.
about that. That's just the way that it was explained to me.
Yeah, I couldn't find that verse with flesh. I typed it in. Matthew does not have. He has several verses mentioning flesh. And there's nothing like the one that we were talking about, though.
Yeah, I'm searching too. Maybe it wasn't Matthew. See if I put. It's just flesh comes up a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
In the Bible. Put flesh walks. No flesh walks. Obviously, I encourage your listeners to research this. I'm going to research this later so that I know. But the point is that I think that the earth, as it pertains to God's kingdom, a lot of Christians will try to say that we're not supposed to look into all this and that it's a waste of time. I don't think that. I think that this realm is God's beautiful creation, and I think that he would be delighted that we're researching it, especially when the secular overlords are discouraging it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and wanting us to pacify ourselves more with video game. Like, as a person who's in their 30s, it's really kind of disturbing how many guys I know that are completely addicted to video games, and they will not watch anything of any real substantial value besides things related to video games or science fiction or comic book heroes. You know, it's very disturbing. And people say, "Oh, just let them enjoy things." Yeah, I'm fine with people enjoying things, but we're seeing a breakdown of these men don't want to step up and raise families. They don't want to work hard. They want just it's creating a very big problem in my mind. Yeah. And that goes back to that divorce from spirituality.
Yeah, anything that controls us to any degree really is no good for us. I have a practice where you know, it's not a religious thing, but you know, I mean, when I say a religious thing, it's not that I do it like every 40 days, but often when I feel that I'm being controlled by something, when I'm giving into something too easily, I'll put that away for 30 or 40 days. You know, I stopped drinking coffee several times. I've stopped doing many different things. It's been like 50, I don't know, I'm not keeping track, but it's been quite a while since I have ejaculated. You know, these are practices that I regularly do because I was an addict and I was addicted to everything, and I understand the control that these little things have on me, and I give it up. And every time I gave something up, say, I often talk about when I go on other people's shows, I often talk about how Jesus, like the way that I learned Jesus was God was I kind of was trying to debunk Jesus as God, and then it turned out I couldn't. But it wasn't that I was actively seeking to put Jesus, you know, out of the picture. I was just searching everything else other than Jesus and Christianity, and I searched all that stuff, and then I realized that, you know, the lies and traps of all the different things, and came to Jesus and found that that wasn't a lie or a trap. So I say that often, that I tried debunking them, but that's really how it happened. Was I looked into everything else and saw that they were all traps and that Jesus wasn't. So I give up things on a regular basis, and they'll come back to me in a new way, better way. Like if I stop drinking coffee, then all of a sudden the coffee is more effective because I stopped drinking coffee for so long. Now it's more effective. So I'll do things like that. And it was Jesus is like the only thing that I couldn't give up, because, you know, that is everything really. When it comes down to it, that was the only thing that was still there when I wasn't participating. You know, when I was his enemy, he was always a friend to me. And it didn't matter that I wasn't actively seeking him out. He always loved me. And it
Hmm.
just took me realizing that just boom, blasted me into this relationship with him that's so strong.
No, exactly. And that's the thing, is that people, if they just opened up their mind, even just for a few hours or so a day or a week, just gradually kind of ease themselves into a different kind of thinking, a different a kind of, we as humans, we have these we're called like muscle memory in our brain.
Mm-hmm.
And we have these like pathways are formed, and these and we get addicted to thinking a certain way, we get addicted to acting a certain way, and it's very bad because it's like a parasite, and it needs to live off of perpetual fulfillment.
Yeah. It's the chase.
You know, it's like we can't trust, sometimes it's like we can't even trust ourselves when it's ourselves that are ones who want to be satisfied.
Right, and that's why we have to take control. The spirit has to take control of the body. Adam has to whip Eve into shape. You know, with Adam and Eve is everybody is the male and the female. The spirit is the male. The body is the female. The male always enters the female. You know, when you have an outlet or a hose or any kind of pipe fittings or anything at all, the male always enters the female. It's just how it is. So the spirit enters the body, that is the male entering the female, and the male always is in charge. It's only when the male gives into the female, when the human gives into its urges, do we then become addicted to things and trapped into all these different things. But if the male always has the option of doing whatever the male wants to do, because the male is always in charge. And I'm not saying this in a relationship type of way, anybody who may be interpreting that way. I'm only talking about a single person, each individual, but the spirit always has the control, and it's whether that the spirit exercises the control is whether or not we give into these urges, and then the urges become addictions and pleasures and all these other things that go with it, but it's always the spirit that's in control.
Exactly. Well, it's when we get back to the old saying of the flesh is willing, but the body is weak, or the body is willing, you know, the mind is willing, but the flesh is weak, and vice versa.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, I found, just to kind of go back to what we were talking about a moment ago, I did find the example of what I was talking about with the
Okay.
book of Enoch. So I found a page here. It's a Bible reference page, and it says, "And I saw the great rivers, and I reached the great darkness, and I went there where all flesh walks." And then it says Lamentations chapter 3, verse 6, Job 10:21 to 22, Jude 1:6 to 13, and 2 Peter 2:4 and 2 Peter 2:17 through 18. So I don't know why those other books are cited, but the point is that we have, "And I saw all the great rivers, and I reached the great darkness, and went where all flesh walks."
And the book of Enoch
So that's
says where no flesh walks.
where all flesh walks. So it's an inversion of what the book of Enoch says.
Oh, okay.
So I can copy and paste that.
And what book was that in?
Here, well, that's the interesting thing is I'm on book of Enoch references.wordpress.com. And so I'm just going to copy this, and then you can still look at your Instagram while you're talking to me. Okay.
It went out. You there? Uh-oh, I think your bandwidth is extremely low right now, it says.
I'll just message this. Yeah, I'm still here. Did I cut out again?
Yeah. I guess when you're doing stuff, it's yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Well,
Yes, so here it is.
Yeah.
So Lamentations 3:6, and I saw all the great rivers, and I reached the great darkness, and went where all flesh walks. Oh, that's certainly interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know exactly why the Book of Enoch was taken out. There's obviously, we can speculate on that, but to me, I think, well, I know that the Book of Enoch would be older than any book in the Bible. It's just simple math. If Enoch was alive well before anyone else in the Bible was alive, then at least the oral tradition existed long before any of the books of the Bible existed. And actually, according to mainstream history, they can't tell if it's the Book of Enoch or the Book of Genesis. They were written so closely in time, they don't know exactly when either was written and which one was first. But obviously, Enoch was alive before Moses. So,
Yeah.
It seems to me that it's the Book of Enoch is a historical account in its entirety, whereas the Bible is made up of a bunch of books that together make a story. The Book of Enoch itself is its own story. And like I said earlier in this conversation, that religion to me only came about a few hundred years ago, that the Bible was actually just the historical document that we kept as a species, that it had nothing to do with religion, it had nothing to do with Christianity or Judaism or anything at all. It was just the truth of, this is the world that you're in, this is what you're up against, and every generation would add something to it. I don't know exactly how it went, but I think it was probably something to that effect. That to me makes more sense than anything else.
No, that's completely plausible, and that's the kind of thing that really strikes fear in the heart of organized religion, especially your big mega churches like your Joel Osteens and your Peter Popoff kind of guys. I don't know if you remember him; he's from the '80s. But you have these TV evangelical preachers, and I just want to talk about one more thing. I know we're coming up on an hour and a half here, but before we lose connection again or something like that, I just want to say, there's a lot of talk about is this going on YouTube?
Yeah, it will be.
Okay, so I got to be careful. But we know that there was a certain thing in the news a few years ago. It was really popular on some of the internet, image boards about these elite people, doing things with children and all that kind of stuff. Well, that got brought up by the TV evangelical people in the 80s. It was called the Satanic Panic.
Right.
And then they tried to tie Ozzy Osbourne and Judas Priest and Twisted Sister into it and make it about the music and say, oh, how silly, they're going after these bands. They think they're demonic and that there's evil messages if you play the record.
So.
Well, the thing is they say, oh, they went too far attacking the music industry. We didn't go far enough. We were on the right track. We were starting to talk about prostitution in the White House. We were starting to talk about
Finders cult.
And who finds what the finders hide. And all that kind of stuff. And so I just want to say, one more thing is, and I mentioned this on the Shadow Band podcast, and I really want this to get ingrained in people's heads so they do their own research, is that is part of the old world. And that is the old scary world, is that these people who worship Baal and Moloch and these Babylonian gods, it never ended.
Right.
It never ended. And it's not a big deal. You get over it and you research it and you live with that evil that exists in this world of flesh. Is that
you have to realize it exists.
Exactly. And you start talking about this kind of stuff and people get and you get nervous laughter and they make jokes about it and stuff. It's not funny. These are human souls we're talking about. And I it's my personal opinion that the rituals never stopped. They just got more sophisticated and they kept up with the parlance of the time.
Right. And a lot of spiritual people will say that good and evil don't exist. But then they're in conspiracy theory communities that are talking about this, and it's like, well, how do you reconcile that in your own mind? You're finding out about all this, and I know people who have spoken to people who have been part of the SRA, the Satanic Ritual Abuse, in different capacities, and still have the opinion that good and evil doesn't exist, that you can just freely choose to participate in whatever, and it doesn't exist if you're not participating in it. And I don't understand how someone could reconcile those two things at the same time.
And you start talking about red rooms, and people say, oh, well, red rooms are an urban legend. Red rooms aren't real. And are you familiar with the concept?
Yeah, what's murder backwards?
Oh, no. Red room, like a red room, like a room that's all red.
Okay.
And there's a live stream, and people pay to see what happens in the red room.
Okay. And now I'm
And
not familiar with this.
Yeah, well, it's a theory. It's not really a theory. I think it's a fact. It's kind of an urban legend, I guess, is that there's these rooms, and they torture and they kill people, and people pay tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to watch the live stream on the dark net. And I was talking to somebody, and they said, I don't think that that's true. Nobody's that evil. And I go, I'll tell you why I believe it to be true is because there was an instance last year where there was a Russian YouTuber, and he was just drunk with his friends. He's just doing a live stream, and some mysterious person came into the chat room and started giving him a lot of money. But he was saying, oh, hurt your friends, like bust the beer bottle over your friend's head. He said, okay, I'll do that. And then he like busted a beer bottle over, and then they got more money. And they said, it ended up to put your girlfriend out on the balcony. Now we're talking about Russia in the winter, so it was like below 0 Fahrenheit. And then he's like, okay, that's enough. I'm going to let her back in. She's naked. And then the guy said, no, leave her out there. It'll be funny. I'll give you more money. This guy ended up giving the Russian YouTuber the equivalent to like 15,000-20,000 US. The girl died. And then the guy left the chat room. So he knew what he was doing, because the guy probably wasn't drunk, but the guy on the streamer was. So he didn't realize. Well, he went out there and found his girlfriend dead. He started crying, and and so what I'm saying is people will pay to see people hurt.
And people will do anything for money.
Exactly.
So red room, if red rum is the murder backwards, but you could also pronounce the U as double O and a U could be interchangeable. So
exactly. So there could be some symbology there as well. But what I'm saying, as far as all this stuff, how it pertains to research, is when you start researching the old world, you find that people had all kinds of these strange rituals. And personally, I just don't understand how people can think, even for a moment, that these death cults, these Saturnian, or what we call Saturnalian kind of cults, the worship of Saturn, the black cube, and all that. And then you look at Saturn, what they tell us is Saturn. I don't personally believe in the mainstream solar system, but taking things at face value, there's a hexagon that spins independently on one of the poles of Saturn, and it's doing it right now. And what's up with that? And then we see the black cube everywhere on Earth.
Right. And it's weird the way that the stone at Mecca, I'm sorry, anyone out there, I don't know the proper term for this black cube that's in Mecca, but when the people are walking around it, it kind of looks the same exact way. And it would be if you took a cube and spun it, and you put it from the point to the point, rather than, there's flat on the side, and then you twist it so it's almost like a diamond, and then you spin that is exactly what a hexagon, it would make a hexagon.
Exactly. And then even in Judaic, you see some of the high rabbis, they have a little hat, and it has the black cube on it too.
Right.
But they only bring that one out, I guess, for special occasions or something like that. But that's a whole other world. And then we see, they don't want us non-Hasidic, non-Orthodox Jews to even read the Torah. According to the Torah, we're not even supposed to be reading the Torah. And they have all these weird superstitions and all these weird bylaws. And it's like, that's gatekeeping.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we can't stop people from doing their own research, but it's a little strange when you have a religion that says, if you're not of this religion, don't research it. We don't want you to know what we believe. And where else do you see that? You see that with Scientology.
Yeah.
Scientologists are not supposed to share the information that they have to pay for.
Right. And I wanted, before we get off it, I want to say with the black cube, our cell phones, our TVs, our computers, all that stuff are black cubes.
Oh yeah.
We just, we don't necessarily think of it in the same way, but black obsidian is Black Cube, Black Mirror. It's all from the interdimensional world. And to me, the book of Enoch is very clear in saying that the planets are wandering stars. They're the transgressors, the fallen angels. And to me, the abyss, space is the abyss, and the planets as we know them are, our ancients knew them as the wandering stars, because they wandered out of their post, because they were the watchers. They were supposed to be watching the earth like the rest of the stars.
Oh yeah.
They are now locked in orbit, which could also be said as they are locked in their chains around the sun. They are made to worship the sun. We are not spinning around the sun, but they are. The sun is spinning around us and giving us his light, while they are made to worship the sun, locked in their chains. So
oh yeah, exactly.
they
And that's
tell
when,
us the truth. It's just they use synonyms. They change words a little bit so that we think the lie and don't understand the truth.
oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's something that I like to tell people. I like to bring to people's attention, and that was a perfect segue for it, which is that these people do believe in what they're doing. And when they believe in what they're doing, which they do, they have rules too that they follow. And people go, oh, they don't follow any rules. They don't. And I say, no, you don't understand. They believe that they get power from these rituals, that they get power from these things. They're very deeply religious people in their own right.
They're very into their oaths of secrecy.
They're very into their oaths of secrecy, but they're also into adhering to the rules that are put forth. And one of those rules is that, yes, they do have to tell us the truth, but they can put it wherever they want.
Yeah.
Whenever they want.
And they can say it however they want, even if it is deceiving. Like I said, they tell us that it's orbiting the sun. Well, yeah, orbiting the sun, or locked in chains around the sun. Either way, it's the same thing. We just don't think of it in those terms.
Exactly. And, a lot of Freemasons are businessmen, right? Like, we know that, and they help each other out with their businesses. Well, there's a rule in Freemasonry, and it's also in other, secret societies, is that you have to give the first customer of the day a good deal, and you have to give the last customer of the day a good deal to make up for how badly you treat all the customers in between, as a way of kind of balancing the scales. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's the whole checkerboard thing, the good and evil. You have to offset everything. But the checkerboard also is the static electricity from the other universe, that if you were to be able to freeze frame the static on our TVs, the old TVs.
Yeah, the hydrogen.
Yeah, if you're able to freeze it and then zoom in on it, it would look like a checkerboard. It's black and white, and it has two pillars on the side of the checkerboard, because that represents the sides of the thing that the projection is being projected on. And it's all about the interdimensional travel with them.
Yeah, and you think about TV programming, they call it a TV program.
Channeling.
And channeling. Yeah, I mean, word magic, right?
Remote control, remote view. It's all there.
Yeah, no, and it's crazy that and we put it, and I don't like to use fiction as an example and use like popular culture references. I try to keep that kind of stuff to a minimum. But the one thing I'll bring up is the filmmaker David Lynch. And I know a lot of people, there's a kind of a whole cult around him and everything. But the one thing I'll bring up is that in his kind of ongoing, series, that the Twin Peaks show, is he talks about electricity a lot. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched that.
I have not. I've heard of it.
Okay. Well,
you're kind of going out again.
Watch it. The people that have seen it, there's actually a theme throughout his movies where. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's kind of, it's. You
hear me now?
Yeah, it's in and out. Can you hear me? All right, folks, we are back. But yeah, I think we should probably wrap it up there, because the internet's going out again, and and we don't want to miss too much more, but we'll definitely have to have a follow-up to this. This was a phenomenal episode.
Yeah, I would enjoy coming back on with a little bit, maybe a little bit more structure, a little bit more notes or something like that. But it was definitely a good first episode with you, and I'm glad that you had me on and I was able to kind of get some things off my mind that I think your listeners would appreciate. And the thing about, since we didn't really talk about the mud flood and Tartaria too much, is it's really emerging into an umbrella term, kind of like saying, hey, we don't really know exactly what this is, but let's try to figure it out together. And the other thing I want to say is really important, especially at the end of the episode here, is we need to stop all the infighting, and we just need to focus on, okay, we might not agree on all these external things that have to do with the current situation of our realm, the things of the flesh, the things of material, but let's try to focus at least and agree that we're not being told the truth on mainstream topics, and that we need to not bicker and not cause any division within the community, like between people that believe in the globe and people who believe in flat earth, and people who are Christian and people who are not Christian. We can't let that kind of classic division divide us, essentially, in a nutshell. So that's all
we
I'll
need
say
to
on
find
that.
our similarities, and we need to rejoice around them and then build from there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much on all of the big, social media platforms. Obviously, YouTube under Old Scary World. Instagram is Mudflood Memes or Old Scary World. TikTok is Old Scary World. Bandcamp. I have a Bandcamp page if you like the music that's in the YouTube videos. I have those as just tracks alone with no narration, obviously. And then oldscaryworld.com is where you can find t-shirts, sweatshirts, other merchandise to help support my research and the channel. And then obviously I have a Patreon as well. And all those links can be found on my Instagram at Mudflood Memes on Instagram.
And I'll include them in the description as well.
Exactly, yeah. And pretty much from the Instagram, you can find everything else there in the bio. There's a multi-link kind of thing that'll bring you to all the other stuff, including the Telegram chat.
That is awesome. And we didn't even get to, I wanted to talk a little bit more about your clothing line as well. So we'll have to talk about that next time, because I often, all my shirts that I've been buying lately, all these hats I've been buying lately, they're all about Christ, because I realized that for so long, I mean, the shirt I'm wearing now is a work shirt. So I just came from that. So anybody watching, I'm not wearing one now because I'm still dirty from working 13 hours today. So, but the reason why I wear Jesus clothing, and I have my bracelet on always as well, and it's not to show off or to try to virtue signal. It's because when I was in a secular line of thinking, I would promote those types of thoughts and businesses and so on and so forth. But now that I'm in with Jesus, I'm not going to shy away from what I was doing. I am going to embrace Jesus, and I'm going to adhere to the call that I hear from Jesus. I'm not going to do what's expected. I'm going to do what I'm called to do.
Yeah, exactly. No, you got to try to spread the message as much as you can. I think, like I said before, clothing is a really good way to do that, because it's on us, and it's a great conversation starter, and people, it's a dual purpose, because people get a garment that will, that they can wear, and then it's also supporting the people who are making such products.
Right. So we'll definitely have you back on for a part 2 to cover that part. We can show a little bit of your website off, or I'll do a share screen and do that. And we can also hit some more of the mud flood stuff. Excuse me. We barely touched into any of the Tartaria stuff, but I think this conversation that we had was much more important. And we established a good basis. So I can't wait for part 2. Everybody, buckle up.
Sounds good, brother.
All right. So we'll say goodbye to our audience. Goodbye, everybody. We will talk to you later.